My name is Kara Hackett, and I am your host for this webinar. And before we go ahead and get started with introducing our guest and go ahead and kicking off the webinar, I want to go ahead and just cover a couple of housekeeping tips. So please note that this webinar is now being recorded. If your camera is on, the audio and video feed will be captured and also used for Smithsonian purposes. So please ensure that you're not sharing any material that may be private, sensitive, or confidential. If you do not wish for your image or audio to be captured and used in this way, please just go ahead and keep your microphone and camera off during the session until our question and answer segment towards the latter half of this webinar. So again, just wanted to go ahead and reiterate to please just keep your cameras off so we can conserve all of our bandwidth here in our main room. Please put yourself on mute to reduce the background noise. And then please, as we are speaking with our guests, please take full advantage of the chat box and we will answer your questions toward the end of the webinar. I want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Monique Chisholm, who's the Undersecretary for Education here at the Smithsonian Institution, and she will be giving us our opening remarks.
Thank you, Kara, and thank you so much for this great opportunity. I'm so excited actually about this conversation. And I also just want to thank the entire Smithsonian Science Education Center team for your continued efforts to help shine a light on the importance of STEM and diversifying the STEM workforce, and also thinking about representation in STEM. So thank you for inviting me to the stories of women of color in STEM. The Smithsonian is dedicated to making our nation a more inclusive and diverse place that lives up to its ideals. It's important to me and to all of us that all students, but in particular, underrepresented students, can envision and see themselves in a variety of STEM careers. And it's also important that they see examples of successful professionals that look just like them. Contributions made by women of color to STEM often go widely untold in the story. Resources like the book that we'll discuss today, Stories of Women in Color, the STEM ebook, help to ensure that these underrepresented narratives are continuously being shared with younger generations. Here at the Smithsonian, we are committed to capturing, highlighting, and showcasing the voices, experiences, and contributions of groups and communities that are often left out of the broader narrative. I want to thank you for your willingness to commit your time to us today to engage in this conversation. And we are really happy that you're here. You're in for a treat. I'm going to go ahead and turn it now over to Dr. Carol O'Donnell.
Hi, everyone. How are you? Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon as we talk about the launch of this ebook. I'm going to share a little bit with you about the Smithsonian Science Education Center. I am the director of the center, and I started here at the Smithsonian back in 1990 and have been very fortunate to be able to work for the center for 17 years. So what I'd like to tell you about is a little bit about what we do. So we are one of probably 30 plus organizations that make up the Smithsonian. Some of you may have heard about the Smithsonian Institution and you know that we have many museums, 21 now to date. We also have 9 research centers and 5 education centers, a zoo, 3 cultural centers, 21 libraries. It's a very big place, and we have millions of objects in our collection. But the Smithsonian Science Education Center is just one of those education organizations. And we basically focus specifically on helping to serve teachers and students in K-12 education. So from kindergarten all the way up till you graduate in 12th grade. And we serve, as I mentioned, not only students and families, but caregivers, teachers, schools, school districts, and we even work across the globe serving ministries of education in other countries. And our goal is to bring object-driven experiential learning to classrooms across the globe so that young students can experience the practices of science and engineering from a very young age. And what I'm so excited about today is that we're going to be able to hear from two women, two incredible women who are highlighted in the ebook that we hope you'll choose to read, which focuses on promoting women of color in STEM. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Kara, who, by the way, is the author of the ebook that we're hoping you've chosen to read. So Kara?
Thank you, Carol. So again, for those who are just joining, my name is Kara Hackett. I am the Marketing and Communication Specialist here at the Smithsonian Science Education Center, and I am also the author of the Stories of Women of Color in STEM ebook. So I'm so glad that you all are able to join us today. And I just wanted to just give a brief overview of the ebook. And I'm sure that everyone, after we go ahead and have our discussions with our two guests today, that everyone will just go ahead and read it and just send us all of your feedback, and that this will inspire girls in your life who are also interested in STEM. So the Stories of Women of Color in STEM ebook amplifies the work of 5 women of color in STEM who are transforming the industry within fields of microbiology, zoology, and beyond. These Stories of Women of Color in STEM project has been supported by the Johnson & Johnson, and is also a part of the Smithsonian Science Education Center's Girls and Women in STEM initiative. I've had such a good time writing, researching, interviewing as a part of the ebook, and I'm so happy that you all get to listen in on just a little bit of what our interviews covered with Robin and Carly. So these are our featured guests for today, and I'll go ahead and introduce them. So Robin Kumoluyi is the Vice President and Chief Quality Officer, Pharmaceuticals at Johnson & Johnson. Her interest in science at a young age led her to pursue a career in biological sciences with a specialization in microbiology from Rutgers University. She has more than 30 years experience within the pharmaceutical industry, and her expertise ranges from over-the-counter medications to food and beverage products. And next up, we have Carly Hornberger. So Carly is a primate keeper with the Smithsonian National Zoo, where she works in the Great Ape Department. She has great expertise on training and enrichment with the 5 different species of primates that she works with, but the Siamese are her favorite. She also has experience as a veterinary technician. And after earning her psychology degree from the University of Maryland, she decided to pursue zookeeping, and that's what led her to the Smithsonian. So now that we have wrapped up all of our introductions, we're going to just go ahead and jump right in to speaking with Carly and Robin. And I'm so excited that we're here again, Carly and Robin. I've had such fun interviewing you all as a part of the book. So I'm glad that you all were able to join us today. All right, so let's get us started with our first question. And Robin, hope you can kick us off here. So what was your first memorable experience with STEM?
Well, my first experience with STEM, and that was most memorable for me, was actually before we even understood STEM as a thing, right? In terms of what that really means. It was looking at water under a microscope as a young child. I think I was maybe around 9 years old, and seeing things move and understanding that things that you can't see actually exist. And so for me, it was that first interaction with the microscope and really seeing microbial life that I will never forget. I think you and I had talked during our session, and I actually traded a Barbie doll to get that microscope from one of my friends. And so I put everything under that microscope, and really being able to see life in water that you can't see without a microscope was really memorable for me. So that was it. I was hooked after that.
And Carly, how about you? What was your first memorable experience with STEM?
Strangely enough, I think it was going to a zoo. We grew up around here, and we had access to both, it was called the Baltimore Zoo at the time, but the Maryland Zoo and the National Zoo. And then on top of that, we went to Smithsonian's a lot. We lived at the time pretty close to the water, and we had a dairy farm right next door. So always around animals, always very interested. We always had a ton of pets. So anything living or breathing, I was very interested in right from the get-go.
All right, so it seems like both of you all clearly have, childhood memories of what sparked your interest in STEM. So can you just give us a little bit of insight as to how you all were able to kind of like keep that momentum going through elementary, middle, and high school? How are you all able to foster your interest in STEM as you grew up?
Well, for me, I knew I liked animals, and after discussing this with my mother, she advised me to continue to take biology courses, which I did. And then during the summers, she would help me sign up to do different activities because she didn't like us just sitting around the house. So I remember one summer I spent about a month on a boat doing volunteer work for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, doing a lot of research with oysters in the watershed and crabs and other things like that. Another year, I actually went to Europe and we did some work removing invasive plants out of rivers in Germany, and I did that for a while. And that was more high school, but definitely elementary, middle, high school, a lot of science classes. A lot.
Yeah. For me, it was taking quite a few classes, and I'll have to say also television. So I became enamored with this program called Quincy, where he was a medical examiner when I was younger. Maybe many of you don't know because it's some years ago, but I was convinced that I wanted to be a doctor. Then I was convinced I wanted to be a medical examiner. And so I just was really excited with all of the shows that has some sort of scientific diagnostic part to it. So a lot of watching programs like that, a lot of watching things on TV around science. But in high school, I was very fortunate. A friend of mine's dad was a microbiologist, and he was an African-American male. So I did get to see someone who looked like me. And he was actually a microbiologist, and he helped to really shape my career in high school and some of the thinking. And I got to visit his lab. So I got to go in and see what he does on a day-to-day basis. I got to see bigger and better microscopes, right? Because in the pharmaceutical industry, we have some pretty sharp instruments. And so that was it for me. It was watching those programs on television. It was, of course, taking the courses in school. And then I had a mentor who was actually a microbiologist. At that time, I still wanted to be a doctor though, but it changed to micro as a real love.
Robin, it's interesting that you mentioned, you having a mentor and whatnot. So for Robin and Carly, for both of you all, how did having like family or friends or a mentor, how did that really maybe start defining like maybe this is what I want to do for a career? So how did a mentor help you in your decision-making process?
So the gentleman that I just mentioned as a mentor, he remained a mentor all through college. I will tell you, when I got into school, I wanted to be a doctor. So that was what I was going to do. I realized after trying to do a finger prick and all of these things that I could not be a doctor. Maybe I would have the, intellect and the academic chops to be a doctor, but not necessarily the fortitude. I'm a bit empathetic. And so I, felt like I would be crying for a doctor to help, and I'm supposed to be the doctor helping. So that really just wasn't for me, but I still was in love with the sciences. And he convinced me that if you're going to stay in the sciences because you love micro, you see what I do in the lab, that you should specialize and not be a generalist. So that's why I specialized in microbiology, because there's actually a job called microbiologist, and I was able to see that through the work that he did. So he really encouraged me to stay into the sciences, which is my love, and to pursue microbiology. So he was really helpful. My parents also very helpful throughout my young age into high school. Very much a cheerleader. So I'm sure some of the young folks get embarrassed by their parents. I am no different. You know, I would come out and my dad would have his friends over and they'd all clap. And I'm wondering, what are they clapping about now? Oh, your dad told us you're going to be a doctor. So they were always encouraging me, you know, to learn, to explore, to do bigger and better things. And, you know, they got me another microscope versus that little tiny one that I traded for a Barbie doll. They got me a bigger one. So very helpful, very encouraging, my parents and my mentors.
That's so special. Carly, how about you? What were some of, what were some of the ways that family and friends and mentors, you know, kind of inspired you along your journey?
So when I was in high school, my parents took it upon themselves to go back to school and get their degrees. So that was inspiring to watch them go to school. And I can sympathize, Robin. They pushed me to become a veterinarian because of my interests with animals. But I am also very squeamish and could not do the needles, the blood, no. So I kind of reeled back, and I reeled back a little too far because one of my side hobbies was art, which I also loved. So I decided to go to art school to be an animator, which if you couldn't tell from my decorations, I love Disney. And I wanted to work for them. It wasn't for me, unfortunately, and so I decided to go a different route with animals and do more animal behavior, and then ended up just kind of in psychology because unfortunately University of Maryland didn't have like a animal behavior degree, but this entire time my parents, my family were very supportive, very like they understood when I decided to leave art school. They decided like maybe that wasn't the right choice, and they agreed with me. They held my hand through the whole process, even in high school, talking about, you know, wanting to be a veterinarian and understanding what medical school would mean, even though it's not what I ended up doing. Just they were 100% supportive of all of my decisions, which I think helped me along the way.
Okay. And Carly, you just mentioned something that I thought was interesting about University of Maryland. They didn't have like a animal behavioral specialty for you to pursue, but you did, you know, go into psychology. Were there any classes that you felt like helped you along your journey?
Yeah, actually, there was one. It was a extracurricular that I took, but it was an anthropology course all about great apes and their relation to humans and just them in the wild. And obviously it was more a biological anthropology based course, so we didn't get a lot into the care of them, but it was just extremely interesting learning about them. And I think that's really what got me like going in that direction. And so like I had to go to the San Diego Zoo, and I remember spending hours watching their orangutans. They have this huge exhibit, and it was amazing just watching them like climb and brachiate. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I like them. I can continue to watch these guys all day long. And then when we moved back to Maryland, I was very lucky to start volunteering at the National Zoo, and that really just concreted me in here.
Okay. Robin, how about you? Were there any classes in college that you felt like really made a difference in your success?
Yeah, I really loved pathogenic microbiology. So you got to learn about all the pathogens. You also got to learn about, you know, how to test for them. So that was really good for me. Genetics was another course that I loved. Industrial microbiology, I also loved. That was really interesting, right? Because you learned about things like fermentation and how you actually take the science of microbiology and turn it into work. right? You use fermentation for all sorts of things, for foods, for medicines. We learned about the different equipment. So that industrial course, I think, was a really good link into what you could do with microbiology across multiple industries. So those courses were really good for me. And most people are going to cringe when I say this, except for, I guess, the actual biochemistry, but I loved biochemistry. So that was another one that was just fantastic for me. But all of them were very helpful and shaped the background that I needed to do the work that I've done throughout my career.
Okay. And I don't know if this was you all's experience, but I know for me, like when I entered college, I wasn't 100% quite sold on what it was that I was going to pursue as my career. But for you all, what was the point, or was there a defining point where you realized like I can actually turn my interests into a career? Robin, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So for me, I went in wanting to be a doctor. So I was going to be pre-med. I was going to be a doctor until I had to do that finger pricking that Carolyn and I both are a little bit squeamish on. And so at that point, I decided that I would obviously stay in the sciences, but I always knew that it could be a career, right? Just from watching the earlier programs on television, from my mentor. And obviously there is a career called being a physician. But I pretty much knew going into college that I wanted to be in the medical field. But it changed. You know, I'm in the pharma industry now, and microbiology obviously played a huge part in that. But I knew, you know, that I was going to be in the science. Well, I knew I was going to be a doctor, like I said, until that changed. And then I stayed in the sciences, which, you know, very thankful to have the mentor to help me make that decision.
Carly, how about you?
Well, kind of same. I knew that a zookeeper was 100% a career option. I just, for whatever reason, it didn't hit me until after college that it was for me. In school, art school didn't work out. Psychology was great, and then after school, I was at the veterinary hospital working with them. But again, the needles and things wasn't doing it for me. So I started to volunteer just to help out, and then like I swear to you, day one, I was like, yeah, this is it. Like I was like, this is what I need to do with my life, and I was immediately hooked. And that's when I really started to focus on becoming a zookeeper.
Okay. And as you all started to really like focus and hone in on your careers, were there any, or was there any special person that you found, you know, inspiration with to pursue your careers? Is there anyone who inspires you now in your work?
Yeah, I think all of the members on the primate team are inspiration every day. They're all extremely intelligent people. They have been in the field much longer than I have, so they help and give me advice every single day. And honestly, they keep me going and keep me to want to be a better keeper every day.
Yeah, for me, it was, again, my mentor, but also several teachers at university. My pathogenic micro teacher is someone that I've kept in touch with throughout the years. And she's retired now, but she was always encouraging and inspiring. And honestly, just seeing the world out there in terms of vaccines and all of the things that you can do every day keeps me inspired with the science. So I'm not, you know, in the laboratory anymore. I have different roles, but I am a part of all of that activity that still goes on. And so when you think about things like vaccine production, and you think about things like potentially curing cancer with CAR T, those are the sort of things that keep you inspired and interested.
Okay. And Robin, you just mentioned about not being in the lab anymore per se. And I remember, you know, in the book, you and I were speaking about one of your first jobs working in the PCR laboratory. So what was like the actual like career, like trajectory that now has taken you to Johnson and Johnson, and then Carly, you now with the Smithsonian National Zoo.
Okay. So for me, I'm over 30 years in the industry, and I started out in the laboratory. So that was my grounding, which I'm incredibly thankful for having. And so for me, I'm going to tell you, I'm a little bit of a curious person. And I think to be a scientist, you've got to be very curious. And so I was always wanting to know what's going on with these regulations. Why can't I just be a scientist? Why have I got to follow this rule and the others? And so that really got me interested in quality and compliance and really understanding why the rules are there, right? Because you want to produce safe and effective medicines. And so you have to do those things in a specific way in order to help your patients. So for me, that led me into the quality assurance organization. And I started working in quality, I would say, back in 1994 because of that curiosity and wanting to understand more. And then, of course, I wanted to help make the rules once I understood that we needed rules. So I stayed sort of in that arena. And again, had another mentor who helped me to pursue that path in quality and compliance. So on a regular basis, at this point in my career, like I said, I'm away from the labs, but I help to problem solve and make decisions to make sure that we're making safe and effective medicines every day, that things are what they purport to be, so that we really are helping our patients. So I do a lot of problem solving. I also do a lot of coaching for the individuals on my team to help them reach their career aspirations. And so there are laboratories within my organization, and so I do get to really get my hands dirty every now and again, but I do a lot of coaching. I also do a lot of visioning and strategizing for what's next. So what I'm really excited about now is how we're using data. So how are we using data analytics? How are we using automation to really make those menial tasks that are so transactional easier? So we have some things where we use bots to do simple tasks, so that we free our mind to think about future things like CAR-T and curing cancer, and how do we put systems in place. Also using data around insights to better help our patients. So when we get complaints in, what does that trend look like? What is that information telling us? And so we're using things like natural language processing to really analyze and come to root causes of things that might not be going right, as well as how do we improve things for our patients. So I'm really excited in the intelligent automation and the data analytics. So really we're moving into that space to better serve our patients. So that's exciting. I'm thinking a lot about that in the moment.
That's really exciting. Carly, how about you? Can you give us a walkthrough of how you were able to, navigate school and navigate all your different interests and whatnot to lead you to the Smithsonian National Zoo?
Sure. After school and graduating, I started to volunteer at the National Zoo just as a keeper aide, which was 1 8-hour shift a week. And then luckily a internship opportunity opened up in the unit, which I was more than happy to do. So I took on that, which was 3 8-hour shifts a week. And at that same time, for the internship, I was doing a research project about scent preferences in our troop of ring-tailed lemurs. So I spent a lot of time getting to know them and figuring out which scents they liked. We had a whole bunch of different extracts that we get to spray on materials to see if they would interact with it at all. And then I did that for about 6 months, and then luckily a internship or a keeper position opened, and I got extremely lucky and just got the job. Because usually it's not that easy to get into zookeeping. You have to do a lot of volunteer work, a lot of internships, a lot of that nitty-gritty stuff before you get to do the really fun stuff, which I think is training. But luckily, my mentor at the time, Emily, was really great at helping me and walking me through that process and navigating the zoo field, which is a very different beast within itself. But it was great. I don't regret anything I did to get here.
Great. And can you all just, we're going to start with Carly with this question, but can you all just give me an overview of what does a day at work look like for you all? I'm very inquisitive, and I know that you all remember during our interviews that I had lots of questions about what you all like actually do and what does an average work day look like for you all. So can you all just give me just just an overview of what do you actually do all day long with your job?
Sure. So for me, it's coming in pretty early at 6:30. We do wellness checks on all our animals. We medicate all the animals that need medications. And then a huge chunk of our day is just cleaning and prepping enrichment for them. So every day we clean enclosures, feed, we create or make enrichment that we spread around their enclosures. Usually in the afternoons, we do husbandry training with them, which could be anything from radiograph training to injection training to just presenting different body parts, anything really to help with any medical issues that may arise. Whether they get like a scratch, they can show us their shoulder so you can like look at it or clean it if need be. And then just again, if there's any PM meds, and then setting up for the next day, and then making sure everybody's safe and secure, and then we usually go home. It's a lot physically, and sometimes, when the animals choose to do what they want to do, it can be a little frustrating, but they're allowed to do what they want to do. You can't stop them, so you just have to roll with it. And it's a big part of being a zookeeper too, is just learning to be flexible, because they have a mind of their own as well, and they are allowed to not want to shift one day, and that's fine. So you just have to figure out a different way around it, or, just work with them. You're trying to give them the best day, but they don't necessarily know that. So you have to try to convince them that this is what we need to do. Let's go.
All right, and Robin, how about you? What does the average workday look like for you?
Well, I don't really think I have an average work day. Every day is sort of different, for the role that I have now. I can tell you it starts early and it ends late. And the reason it starts early is because I have a global organization. So I'm up early, sometimes meeting with the colleagues in Europe, and then late, sometimes in the evening, meeting and working with the colleagues in Asia. So again, most of my work at this point is really helping to problem solve. It's helping to problem solve, and it's helping the people who work in the labs, who work in our manufacturing sites in the quality organization, do their work. So what do they need my support on? What do they need my help on? How can I help them to be the best they can be? So, I am no longer in the lab. I'm no longer on the front line, but I'm really enabling and trying to inspire and make sure that my team has what they need to produce for the business and for our patients. So for me, it's all about servant leadership, and how do I allow them, again, to be the best they can be and deliver the work that we need to deliver as a team and as a quality organization for the company and for our patients. So I spend a lot of time problem solving and helping to move barriers, to make things go a little more smoothly, and to make sure we're on time. So we talk about things like product launches. What do we have to do there? We may have some testing data that might not be what we need it to be. What's gone wrong there? How do we fix that? And we also do celebrating, right? When we're able to launch that product, when someone is able to really reach a high in terms of their career, we celebrate that as well. So for me, it's about servant leadership, and I am actually supporting the team in making decisions that help them to get their work done. And again, lots of problem solving. You'd be surprised how many things can come up in a day, all around the world.
can only imagine, especially dealing with and working within a global company.
Yeah, and also
So
dealing with regulators too. So not just internally, also externally, right? We may have meetings with FDA or EMA or other regulatory bodies or other external partners that we might work with as well.
okay. Now, both of you all spoke earlier of how like mentors have helped you all along the way and whatnot. And my question to you now is, how can we work to help young girls envision themselves in STEM? What can we do to support their dreams and to support their interests?
Well, I think things like this are a great start. Just showing women in these roles, I think is really important for younger girls to see that these are things that women can do. These are things that women of color can do. And I think also just really supporting like any interest that they have especially when they're real little, kind of like how my parents supported me and all of my crazy little interests really helped me to be where I am today.
Yeah, I think it's all about exposure. I think Carolyn said it just right. And I think Dr. Chisholm said it in the beginning. It's about seeing someone who looks like you in a position and doing the work. And so I think it's incredible, what you all are doing here. And I think more exposure is really what's needed. They just need to see it and believe it.
And Robin, I remember during our interview that you spoke of how we need to stop telling girls that there's a limit to what they can do. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think back to my microscope experience and how I put everything on earth under it, including dirt, which I didn't see much there. That was my first shot. But there wasn't, my parents didn't say, "What are you doing? You're looking messy. Why are you doing that?" I do think that we need to stop. I won't even say stop telling them they can't do it. It's more driving them towards things that we think girls should do. So a lot of times it's not that necessarily you can't do it. It's that shifting of their interest, right? Or sort of trying to drive them towards something more that we think girls should be doing. And it's important that we don't do that. And it's important that we're very conscious and that we think about our actions, because sometimes parents, teachers, and others do that and they don't realize that they're doing it. Right? So we really need to focus on what we are exposing the young girls to and giving them, a variety of things to look at. Right? Because when you're even narrowing those things, again, pushing towards, you're not overtly saying you can't do something, but you are sending that message to them that this is the box that you need to stay in. And so we have to make sure that we don't do that either directly or indirectly. So for me, it's very important, to make sure that they have that variety of things that they're exposed to in terms of what they can do.
Okay. And I want to, share with the audience a little bit about who you all both are outside of your jobs. So, Carly, can you tell us just a little bit about what you like to do when you were not with the National Zoo?
Sure. I like Disney. I like watch a lot of Disney things. I'm a little crafty. You can't see it, but this is also my craft room. So I do a lot of cross stitch and embroidery, lots of things with my hands, which happens to be very ladylike, but it's very relaxing as well. But other than that, like I do also like to get dirty. I garden. I do a lot of house stuff. My husband and I just bought this home recently, and I've taken down doors, put up walls, painted, mudded walls, redid bathrooms. I like to be very hands-on. So I like to stay busy with whatever I can find. I don't like sitting still.
Robin, how about you?
For me, I love to cook. So cooking is a huge hobby of mine. And I like to cook all sorts of foods, from African foods to Chinese to German to Mexican. I've traveled a lot in my career and I've been blessed to do that. And so I've tried so many different cuisines from all across the globe. And so I like to try to recreate things. So that I love. Now I'm going to put on my girly hat, if you will. I also love spas. Like spas. I love, to go to different spas, but not just, for sort of treatments. I like the resort types where there's sort of a spiritual part to it. I like to meditate and I like to have that quiet time to really listen to that inner person and to think about, what am I doing in the world? What am I contributing in the world? So I like that quiet time. I like the retreat, the spa space, and I love cooking, traveling as well. And I've been fortunate to do a lot of that.
Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you for speaking with me. And we're just going to take a couple of questions from the audience here. So the first one we have is, what type of advice would you give to youngsters today to encourage them to consider a career in STEM?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would say just to explore your interests. You would be surprised at how many things can lead back to a STEM-based career. Even if you don't think it's going to, it will. Again, let's keep an open mind, keep exploring, really be curious all the time. Just keep looking.
Okay. And let's see here. What advice would you give to teachers to help them build confidence to keep up with the fast pace of scientific advances? Robin, would you like to tackle this one?
Yeah, I would say more exposure, more programs like this. Bring scientists into your classroom. Give that exposure. And if your parents, take them to places where they'll hear other scientists, women who are speaking, talking. I remember at my son's school going in and talking about CAR-T, which is something that we work with in order to cure cancer. Hopefully one day we'll be able to do that, but it's really being able to get that exposure and inviting the scientists in. We would love to do that. So if you invite us, I'm sure that will come, but they need to see it, right? They need to see it really in operation, what it leads to.
Okay. And our next question here is, this is for both of you all, how have you built community with other women of color within your professions and at your workplace?
Well, for me, I didn't start it, but there are a lot more communities within the zoo world supporting people of color. It's rare to find a person of color in zookeeping. Luckily, that is slowly changing, but so there are groups that I partake in, like AMZAP is a new one, the Association of Minorities in Zookeeping and Aquariums Professionals. And through that, we've been able to connect with a lot of people throughout the United States and Canada now, and some people in Europe as well, of people of color in the same field, various different, so like veterinarians, other zookeepers, administrators, because there are a lot of roles that people can play at a zoo. It's not just zookeeping. And so through this, it's been nice because we've been able to be mentors for people looking to get into this field. We've been able to help them with resumes and just practicing interviews, and just showing that there are different roles other than actual zookeeping within a zoo, which I think is great. So as long as there are more programs like that and for people like us to connect, it's really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to say, like Carolyn, there's not so many people that are women of color in the field that we're in. And I would say in particular at the higher levels, I think if I look across farm, there's myself and maybe there's only one other chief quality officer for a major pharmaceutical company. What I did find very helpful is there's a new organization, not quite 10 years old yet, but I am a member. It's called Women of Color in Farm. And so it's a fantastic organization. It connects women in farm across the board, whether you're a doctor in the clinical space or the quality space or the manufacturing space. And so I love that that organization is now in place. I think another way to do it when you are at work is there are employee engagement groups. And so we have one, an African American group or African ancestry group within J&J. And so there are many affinity groups where you can meet different people with different interests in most of the organizations that are out there. At least the larger companies have these employee engagement groups. And so that's another way. And I would say you have to take the interest. So where I have been at conferences or meetings and I've seen other women, I try to keep that network going. There's also other organizations like there's Awesome and there's Awe. These are women groups for supply chain and just different women in different industries. So there are a lot of women groups out there, not necessarily as many women of color, except for the WOSIP organization that I just mentioned, but you also have to take an interest. So I mentor quite a few young women of color, and I engage wherever I meet them.
Okay, Robin, that actually leads us to our other question from our audience here, and it's what do you think is one of the best characteristics of a good mentor?
Their ability to actively listen. Right, so listening to what you're saying, trying to understand the meaning and giving you some guidance around that. And I do, this is not the question, but I will say there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And so I think as women go into their career, they should understand that too. But really being able to actively listen and to ask you the right questions, not necessarily giving you the answers, because you don't want somebody to give you the answer. You want to be able to think things through and understand what your next move should be. And that's what my mentor did for me. All of them that I've had, they've been able to actively listen and ask me really good questions to get me thinking about what it is I should do or shouldn't do.
Carly, what do you think? What do you think some of the best characteristics of that would make a good mentor?
I agree with Robin that being a good listener is key. I also think being open-minded also is very good, just because we all come from different backgrounds, different situations. And so being able to not judge them for thinking or saying something that they may not know is incorrect, or just don't know, is not good. You don't want to just shut people down, kind of like how we were talking about earlier. You don't want to like drive them a certain way, even if it's on like subconsciously. So I think it's very, very important just to be aware that everyone's different and that's okay. But you can help push in the right direction by asking questions and kind of leading them towards certain things other than just telling them no, because you don't learn anything that way.
Okay, and this is our last question from our audience here. So we have someone who says that they work with a nonprofit rather during an after-school program for underserved and underprivileged youth who are interested in STEM. But they say that many of their scholars are holding jobs, and some of the girls in particular are often they often have to like help take care of family members and whatnot. So do you all have any advice for how the after school program, how they may continue to appeal to these girls and help them fit like the academic rigors around their different schedules and family lives?
I think you might have to maybe spin STEM. Like you could talk about how baking is essentially chemistry. I'm sure they cook dinner, like, you know, like show them that like adding an egg is protein and how it interacts with the sugar and the baking. You know, I think there are ways that you can play to younger children and people in this situation to be like, science is all around you. You just have to look and find it. And that's why it's so amazing. Like it makes our world. And so I think that right there would help a lot.
Yeah, I agree with Carolyn. I think also some of the things that they can explore at home.
Mhm.
So what are some of the science channels? What are some of the programs that they can look at while they have to do other things, and also be educating their siblings as well?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has like smartphones these days. Like I'm sure there are apps that help get kids engaged or cartoons. I'm sure there's tons of things. I don't have children, so I wouldn't know, but I'm sure there's something. And if not, then we should look into making some to help support kids in this situation.
Okay, so that was our last question actually from our audience. And I just want to thank again you, Robin and Carly, both for being able to join in on this webinar and to speak to me once again. I've had such a good time interviewing you all as a part of the webinar, or as a part of the ebook, and also again with the webinar rather. And I also want to thank all of our guests for joining us today and all of our participants. And I want to issue a final thank you to Johnson & Johnson, and this webinar would not have been possible without their generous support. So thank you so much for coming. And please, the Stories of Women of Color in STEM ebook, it is available on the App Store, Apple App Store rather, and it's also available on the Smithsonian Science Education Center's website. And we have actually dropped a link to the ebook in the chat. So please feel free to grab that before we go ahead and end this webinar. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you.